Well, hey there everybody, my name's Aaron. Welcome back to the channel. Hope you're having a great start to your new year. Not long ago, I stumbled upon a Craigslist ad for a lot of computers. And by a lot, I don't mean a lot. It was a lot, but it was a lot, meaning a group. Anyway, I stumbled upon that Craigslist ad and it looked kind of interesting. Even though I couldn't necessarily make out all the computers that were in there, there certainly seemed like there may be a few diamonds in the rough. So I went out and took a look at this group of computers, and sure enough, there were quite a number of old computers that I didn't recognize or were DIY computers that were put together. And this is one of the computers that I found. Now, I knew immediately when I started to look at this and saw that there was a disk drive and a computer board inside and a power supply, that this was something that was going to be quite interesting and probably someone's personal prized possession at some point that they had cobbled together as a DIY computer kit. What I wasn't expecting was that I found out that the computer that I discovered in this Craigslist ad was actually the first generation of a new architecture of PCs that would go on to be quite popular. So today we're going to go ahead and take a look back in time at when I first started to uncover and take this computer apart. Then we're going to take a look at the interesting history I found out about it, and then I'll see if I can get it working. It's coming up right now on the Retro Hack Shack. Today, we're going to be taking a look at this, what I believe is a kit computer, probably from the late 70s, although I'm not entirely sure. I'm just guessing based on what I can see. I haven't really taken a look at this or tried it out or plugged it in or anything. Today, we're going to do a little bit of research here, and hopefully we can figure out what this is, and maybe it'll even work or I can repair it. So really cool piece of history. I love finding things like this that were special to someone or that they had built themselves from scratch or use them in a specific way. That's what makes a lot of my pickups that I find so interesting, is trying to figure out what they were used for. So let's take a closer look at this unit, and then we'll take it apart and see if it works. So first of all, we have this homemade case here that was made out of some aluminum pieces. It's a little bit springy in the middle, so I'm not sure if this sat on top of something or something sat on top of this. But if it did, yeah, hopefully it wasn't too heavy, because this definitely would have gone down quite a bit or sunk down quite a bit because the aluminum's not very thick. But then you have this wood paneling on the side, which just looks like a couple pieces of scrap wood that somebody took and put this case together. So super interesting, definitely DIY going on here. So now let's take a closer look inside this thing. It's so interesting. Look at this. Here's what I assume is the power toggle switch, although it also has a third position, which looks like it could be for reset. And I think I can see 3 lines going to it. So I wonder if that is not only a power switch, but a reset or something like that. Really cool. And then in there, we can see an original power supply that somebody probably put together and cobbled together with this thing. And then we have the main board itself. We'll take a closer look at this, but I'll be really interested to see what the dates are on this chip, as that will help us place it in history and when this board was made. Finally, we have a floppy drive, which really makes me think that this was actually a computer of some sort and was usable, and it could obviously read floppy drives. And look, the original, I don't know if it's the original, but it's certainly a paper protector that you would often put in these things to protect them when you were either shipping or whatever, just to keep things from clanking around in there. And here's a look at the back side. Again, there's another switch here, which is just a 2-way toggle switch. So now I'm thinking maybe that was for the power, but we'll find out. And then there are a couple of connectors here, and it looks like there's at least a serial connector over here, and I'm not sure if this would have been a parallel port. This could have been just another serial port that had a female connector on it. That's what it almost looks like to me based on where I can see the pins are attaching it to it. But yeah, that's the back of the computer. And oh, what's that? There's some sort of a card in here or something. Let's see what's in here. Sedtronics, not Centronics, like the cable connector for printers and things, but Sedtronics. Electronics Test Engineering Services Incorporated on Scotts Boulevard in Santa Clara, California. I've been there many times. Local place. Lots of startups and things got their start near or on Scott Road in Santa Clara. And taking a look inside, I thought this might be a receipt at first, but I think actually it's some sort of printout. I don't know if this is like a test printout, like testing this unit that it works okay. Like maybe this was some sort of test that it did internally and it printed this out when it was done. I don't know. If you guys know, based on what we've seen so far and based on this printout, what this thing is, let me know in the comments below. It'll be a little game. Pause this here, put your guess down in the comments, and then, hopefully through the course of this video, we'll actually reveal what this thing actually is. Well, I'm just starting to take this thing apart, and like I say often on the channel, it's old when they use slotted screws instead of Phillips screws to put this thing together. Much more common back in the 70s than later in the 80s or 90s, obviously. So we've got some old-fashioned slotted screws, which I do not like, but there they are. So let's take this thing apart. All right, so now we can finally get a closer look at this thing, and I'm seeing some interesting things right away, starting over here on the left with this floppy drive. I'm going to have to do some research and see what kind of floppy drive this is. Looks like maybe a Shugart type drive, but I'm going to have to look up some of the model numbers and things on this to confirm that for sure. I'll come back and let you know what I find out. But the other interesting thing to me is that number one over here, it looks like there was two floppy drives connected to this at some point. And we can see the other connector here, which would have gone over. No twist in this, by the way. It's just a straight through connector. So these drives, I assume there was another one over here, would have had used termination to determine the end of the last drive, which would have been needed to get these to work. So I'm going to have to look, assuming that this is where the termination block goes here, that would be missing. So I'll probably have to find the right terminator pack for this particular floppy drive if we want to get it going. The other thing I noticed is there's no power on this drive. So I'm kind of curious how this thing was powered up. So that's going to be interesting to see if this drive will even work at all. Moving on to the main board here, I can see over here we've got a Z80, and it looks like someone had looked at this before I got it, because the dust is definitely very thick on this board, just really thick and crusty actually on this board. So somebody took a swipe at cleaning off this processor at some point to see what it was, and it looks like, to me, it's a Z80 processor. So we've got a Z80 CPU there, which is quite interesting. And then here is the power supply. And really, to know if anything's going on with this power supply, we're going to have to clean this off really well to see if any of those caps are leaking. They look like good quality caps to me, certainly not bulging, but that's going to be step one, is to get this thing cleaned off and then test and see if this power supply is even working. It was at this point that I noticed this little logo down here in the middle of the board, Ampro 1983. So not only is this system a little bit newer than I discovered, but now I have a clue as to what this board is. But before we get into that, I want to thank the sponsor of today's episode, who is all too familiar with PCBs like this, and that would be PCBWay. PCBWay offers inexpensive PCB manufacturing and a whole lot more. Need assembly services? No problem. They can do front side, back side, through-hole components, you name it. They also offer 3D printing, CNC milling, and more. So check out PCBWay for your next project, and I thank them for their support of the Retro Hack Shack. Let's take a closer look at the history of this amazing little board. The Ampro story starts in the late 70s when Dave Feldman, then a social worker in California, was faced with budget cuts that led him to enroll in night courses to learn circuit board design. He eventually got a job at Telesensory Systems, where he met Rick Lehrbaum. Rick had been noticing that used computers were a hot commodity, and that led them both to co-found Ampro Computers Incorporated in 1983, where David would be the chief executive officer and Rick would be the chief technology officer. Their idea was to design a computer that could be used to inexpensively and reliably incorporate embedded PC functionality, a new idea at the time, into data acquisition and control equipment, medical instruments, point-of-sale systems, and other purpose-built devices. And so the little board was born. The little board was designed to be the right size and have screw holes to be attached to the bottom of a 5¼ inch floppy drive, making it very small compared to other systems at the time. You could buy the board by itself for $349 to be built as a kit, with the user providing the floppy drives, power supply, and terminal, and other peripherals, just like the person who built my system did. You could also purchase a pre-built model with a case and two 96 TPI floppy drives for $1,200. The system runs on a 4 MHz Zilog Z80 with 64K of RAM. It also included two serial ports, as well as a floppy drive controller. The original board, like I have here, was designed to run CP/M, but as CP/M was getting long in the tooth at that point, it wasn't long before x86-based little boards would be released. The boards that came after my first edition board here would support hard drives, and they soon introduced mini modules to add things like video output. These mini modules became the basis of a brand new PC architecture known as PC104, with the 104 being representative of the 104 pins on the PC-AT bus. Rick Lehrbaum introduced the form factor in 1987 and later turned it into an open industry standard, free of royalties, by creating the PC104 Consortium in 1992. Measuring only 90 by 96 millimeters, these stackable boards were popular with hobbyists, but really took off in industrial embedded applications as the computers were small, mostly fanless, highly configurable, and would always fit into a standard footprint. Ampro was eventually sold to AdLink in 2008, and the company is still selling modular computers for industrial use, including PC104 systems to this day. And to think that this little board computer I found started all of that. Okay, so now that we know a little bit more about this single board computer, early single board computer, so cool. Now we can begin to test things out and see if we can get this thing working. So as always, I'm going to start by testing the power supply. It's a fairly rudimentary power supply, but it should work, theoretically. I'm just going to go ahead and test the fuse first, just to see if the fuse is working. Yep, so the fuse is still good. Now, taking a look at this a little bit more closely, I can see a few reefa caps. There's one right here. There's another one back here. And then I'm not too worried about those. What I am worried about is this big X-class reefa cap, which may blow when we plug this thing in. It's a little hard to get in here and see whether this thing's in good shape, bad shape, cracking or not. I don't know. So we're just going to give it a try. And if we release the magic smoke and the magic smell, then so be it. But I just want to try this out and see if the voltages are good. So what I've done is I've disconnected the power supply from the system board, and I've connected up this little Y adapter so that I can also make sure that the voltages, the plus 12 and plus 5 voltages, are appearing the way they would normally in a normal system on the normal pins. Usually yellow is 12 and red is 5. So I just want to make sure that those are the same, and that way when I go to use adapters like this to power up the floppy drives and so forth, I'll know that the power rails are normal as they would be for any other system of this time. But I just thought I would check that first. Now, before I actually turn anything on, I'm going to go ahead and check for shorts in between these rails, which will tell me if there's a problem with the power supply. And right away on the 12 volt rail, I'm seeing good activity there. And on the 5 volt, same thing, no shorts. And it looks like the capacitors are charging up pretty quickly. These big capacitors on here are charging up quickly. So at least there's no dead shorts. Well, nothing's blown up yet. 5 volts on the money, man. Not bad at all. Just waiting for that reefa cap to blow, as they normally do once things get warmed up here. Let's go ahead and test the 12 volt rail now. 12 volt rail. Look at that, man. This power supply is darn accurate. Look at that, 5 volt and 12 volt, probably within the accuracy rating of this thing, pretty much right on the money. I'm going to go ahead, and there's no load on this right now, but I'm just going to go ahead and let it sit here, maybe another 30 seconds to a minute, just to kind of warm up and just see if everything is still working. Okay, well, I've got things hooked up. I'll explain what I'm doing in just a minute, but I thought before I go ahead and just go for it and turn this thing on, I should also check for shorts on the board itself. So I've got the power cables hooked up, and I'm just going to test the 5 volt rail for shorts, and it comes back and it's got some capacitors that it's charging up there, but no dead shorts. And same thing for the 12 volt. Yep, nothing doing there, no shorts at all. So I just wanted to check that before I go ahead and power this in, or power it up and do a little test here. I have a good feeling about this, actually. I hope I'm not let down dramatically. It might not, So what I've done here is I have connected a GoTech drive. So the GoTech drive, I was able to find a system disk for this system and hooked up a GoTech drive, so it should be emulating a floppy drive that this thing can read. And since there's no terminators here, this should do its own termination, and this should not have termination because it's the second drive, the first drive in the chain, and this is the second drive in the chain. So we don't want terminators on this drive. This drive isn't even going to be powered up. I have this connected to the extension of the cable, so this should show up, I think, as the first drive, or what would be drive A in a PC, I'm hoping. And if it does, it should automatically start booting off the system disk that's on here. So I've got the Hazeltine 1500 terminal set up in serial mode, and I've got it connected to the serial output here. So if everything's working, this thing might actually boot up. All right, so cross your fingers and wish me luck. I'm going to hit the power switch. Who knows? Maybe we'll get lucky. Will this thing still be working after almost 40 years? Here we go. Okay, it's on. The GoTech has the drive loaded, but seeing no activity on the Hazeltine. No activity whatsoever. So, bummer. It wasn't as easy as I thought it might be. Well, it was worth a try. Okay, well, it's the next night now. I am still convinced that this thing is perhaps working because it's reading the disk. I suppose there could be a problem here with the UART chip, but I did clip onto the lines that are going out, the transmit line, the serial transmit line, to see if there was any activity, and there was. I've changed all of my cables around, checked them, double checked them to make sure that transmit and receive were crossed as they should be. I've checked the configuration of the Hazeltine 1500. I honestly think there's something in this part of it here that I think this thing is actually working. So in desperation, I've gone and got a USB to serial adapter cable, and I've hooked that up. And I've got my tablet here, which I've loaded Putty on. If you don't know, Putty is a great resource. Here it is, download Putty. So Putty is what I use for a lot of my serial stuff. If I want to test things out or just need to hook up a quick serial connection, I typically use Putty. I've been using it for, I don't know, 20 years, something like that. And it does work pretty well. So let's go ahead in and see if I can find Putty. Here we go, Putty the app. That's what I want. And get rid of the keyboard. I'm going to set this for serial, and then I'm going to just double check my connections because this thing should run at 9600 baud, which is what it's set for. And it's set for 8 data bits, 1 stop bit, and no parity. That's what it should be. And the only thing I see that's wrong here is this should be COM3, I think. Okay, there we go. Close keyboard. So it should be set up for COM3. Let's go ahead and open it. And here's the moment of truth. I'm going to go ahead, turn this on, and hopefully we see something on the screen. All right, it should be running. And oh, yep, right there. Ampro. Oh, it's working, dude. CPM version 2.2. That's the disk I loaded. Welcome to the little board. Press any key to continue. Yay, that is awesome. So it was working this whole time. I can't believe it. All right, well, this is super frustrating for me anyway. So if you remember, I tested from the back of the computer to my tablet, and that worked. Well, I went back and hooked up a different terminal. I couldn't get that to work. I brought the Hazeltine back to try some more stuff. I couldn't get that to work. It ended up being this cable, which I tested pins 2 and 3 on, because in the RS-232 pinout, pins 2 and 3 are crossed. One is transmit, one in receive, and the opposite on the other end. 2 should go to 3 and 3 should go to 2, etc. So I did test pins 2 and 3, but I didn't test all the pins, and something is definitely wrong with this particular cable. Either the combination of adapters I was using or something caused this particular cable not to work. Oh, so frustrating, because I basically tested everything else, and I thought I even tested this, and then I came back and found out when I was going through everything for the 4th or 5th time, it was this cable all along that was causing things not to work. Anyway, got a new cable, new adapters, and let's go ahead and power on the system. Drive is counting up tracks. There we go. Ampro, 61K, CPM version 2.2. Oh, I've got this on the wrong disk. So I was actually able to make a startup disk or a boot disk as well, but all it has on it is the boot information for CPM. It doesn't have any starting programs or anything like that. So this is a good example of what happens when you make a boot disk. But let's go ahead and bring up the system disk and see what that looks like on the Hazeltine. And I went ahead and turned this sideways just to make the Hazeltine a little bit easier to work on. But there we go. We're to the welcome screen, and it looks fantastic on this terminal. Here's a little bit better look at what this looks like on the Hazeltine. We hit enter, it gives us the same information we saw before on the tablet. I think we saw this on the tablet, maybe not. But basically, this system disk tells you that you can use some utilities to do what you would do in DOS with autoexec.bat and config.sys, except this uses a program called startup.com, and you can do things like print messages like this, or change the configuration of your system. In fact, if we go ahead and run config, you can see, it says with this utility, you can change various parameters, etc. I'm going to load the parameters from memory, but it's nice that you can save these to disk. If you ever lose them, you could come back and restore them later, kind of as a backup, which is super nice. And then here's the parameters that are currently set in memory. I think these are all default. So you've got, now, I believe this disk might be for the Little Board Plus. I'm not sure, because I did not see a parallel port on this board. Maybe I missed it, but it definitely says, which port are you using for terminal? We're using port A, which is correct. It gives the auto command, or what it's going to run when it boots up, which is startup, some other things about the drives in here. And it's got the configuration for those serial ports in the back, which is exactly how I'm set up on the Hazeltine to interface with this. So everything I had on the Hazeltine was correct and accurate. It's just that that stupid cable is not good, or I'm going to have to do some troubleshooting on it later to figure out what was going on there. But you can see here that serial port B is set for a super low baud rate by default, 300 baud. So yeah, you could basically run a letter over to your friend faster probably than you could send it. No, I'm just joking, but yeah, it's pretty slow. So I'm not going to make any changes, but let's just see about this max drives. Can I set up yeah, you can. You can set up 1, 2, 3, or 4 max drives. So good to know that something like that is in the basically what amounts to the BIOS settings for this computer. And then when you're done, it asks you to either install the changes into memory, or you can put them on disk. Now, I did not see a battery backup for this, so perhaps it's when they say in memory, I don't think it's going to store that anywhere, but perhaps there is a little storage someplace, or maybe you can store these in a file that gets in the startup file, which automatically gets booted up at the beginning, and then it would set these every time that you started up the computer. I'm not sure, but it's pretty cool. We can also see what's on this disk here. There's a bunch of CPM stuff that I'm really not very familiar with. But of course, we have things like the dir program that you can load to see what's on the directory, which I just did. And I tried to copy this onto itself to hopefully let me copy that dir program to another disk. I was hoping if I copied it from A to A, it would prompt me, like sometimes it does in DOS, to insert another disk, or sometimes in DOS there was an A, even though you only had one disk, if you copied from A to B, that would allow you to put another disk in and copy it basically from one floppy to another floppy. So I was trying to do that and it didn't quite work. But yeah, there's all kinds of other stuff. There's pip for moving files. Swap copy is a utility that lets you copy an entire disk. I'll probably be using that later to make a copy of this system disk onto a real physical disk. And there's other things like this Ampro DSK, which allows you to format a disk from scratch in the Ampro format that this thing uses. But what's really cool, there's two files here, multidisk.com and then multiformat.com. This is really, really neat. So if we run multi-format, this computer has support for multiple systems. So you can do format or verify. We'll do format. I don't really want to format anything. Let's select B. I think this chooses... Yeah, there we go. So I'm not really going to run this, especially on my system disk that's running on the Gotek. But look at this. You can actually create formats for lots of other systems, including like the K-Pro 2, for example. So I actually picked up a K-Pro 2 recently, and I could use this to create K-Pro blank disks for the K-Pro if I wanted to. The Moro, the Osborne, all of these systems that would have been out at the time, which were mostly CPM systems, CPM-based systems, you can actually go in and create floppy disks and format floppy disks for all of these different systems. Down here, we have the 96 track per inch formats that it can do. There's a DEC Rainbow format, an Eagle 2E format, and then an HZ 89. I'm not sure what that is. So that's really cool. And if we back out of here, now if we run the multi-disk program, this is also really cool. So what this does is it allows you to put in disks from other systems and be able to access those on a virtual drive. So I can say I want the A drive, in this case, to look like a different drive, and the drive, like, so if I've got a 48 track per inch drive, single-sided, and I want that to be able to read that, you can do that with this particular program. So I can say that I'm going to be using it as a single-sided 48 track per inch, a double-sided, or a 96 track per inch system. And if we go to that menu, you can see all the different types that we can virtualize that drive to look like, so that you can read these disks from other systems. So that's really cool. And especially when you consider that this thing was basically meant to be attached to the back of the drive, this was a really nice little utility, and you could bring this thing around with you. Maybe you have multiple drives in there, and you could just use it as a utility application for reading some of these disks, and it would be all enclosed in a small portable unit with a couple of drives in there maybe, and yeah, you could boot this up and do all sorts of stuff with this little utilitarian computer. Now, one last thing I wanted to do with this system before I call it a day was to get the original floppy drive, or at least the floppy drive that this person used to build this kit computer with, working and actually boot off a real floppy disk. Before I could do that though, there were some problems. You see, with these old tandem drives, a lot of times the latch on the front can become either dislodged or actually broken. Some of the clasps that hold it on can become broken, and so a little repair was needed. It also gives me a chance to confirm the model number, and there it is. It's a Tandon drive, Tandon drive, TM101-4. And over here on the other side, look at this. It's that Sedtronics label that we saw before. So, and there's a date there, January 26, 1985. So that's the company we saw in that little thing that I took out. So maybe that was a test of this drive. Maybe they did a repair on it, and that was the test output that they gave, or maybe sold with the drive to say, hey, look, we tested this and it's operating within specs. So that's cool. I'm actually glad I took this drive out now, because I love those little bits of history for these systems when I find them. So I 3D printed a new part, got some new brass rod, and got everything installed, and I was finally ready to test this full height 5¼ inch floppy drive. Now, using the Gotek drive as a source, I was able to make a copy of that system disk onto a real disk and finally see if this thing would boot off of the original floppy drive. And by the way, in case you're wondering why there's still text on the screen, It's because this is just a dumb terminal. And by dumb, I mean, you know, it's just sitting there waiting for the computer to send it information, and it's just going to leave what's on the screen until something comes along and tells it to print out something else. So unlike a normal computer where if you turned off the computer, the screen would blank, in this case it doesn't, because like I said, it's just a dumb terminal. Okay, so I've got the original drive hooked back up. I'm not going to put the terminator on for now because I just want to see what happens. It might boot up without the terminator. It may not be reliable that way, 100%, but let's just go ahead and try it. So I've got the boot disk in there. Everything's hooked up. Let's turn this back on and see if this is restored to as much of a working state as it could be. Granted, there would have been another drive here, which has been removed, so there would have been 2 drives, but let's see if we've got everything working now that, at least that I got in when I picked this system up. So here we go. Lights on. Drive is spinning up kind of slowly. Is that normal? Oh, there we go. CP/M version 2.2, baby. Yes, this is totally working. Now let's do DIR just to make sure. There we go. It is totally working on this drive. The Ampro little board rides again. Well, you might be wondering what's next for this amazing little Ampro little board that I found here. Well, I would love to find an appropriate case for it. After all, when this thing was initially sold, you could buy a case or you could find a case that had a couple of drives in it, an external case. And because you could mount the board onto the bottom of one of those floppy drives, you could actually create a very miniature computer that you could then hook up to any terminal. You could kind of take this thing with you and make it portable. And I think I might try to do the same. I have a ton of floppy and hard drive enclosures. Some of them have tape drives in them and different things. I bet I could find one that would house 2 half-height or maybe even full-height floppy drives, and then I could create my own self-enclosed Ampro computer. Now, I did try to get other software running on this particular computer, but unfortunately, trying to get CP/M disks made with software that I can make physical copies of turned out to be quite difficult. There are some tools out there like CP/M tools that will allow you to create a virtual floppy disk and then move files off of your computer onto that virtual floppy disk, but I could not get anything to work with the setup that I have. Now, if you have been following my second channel, you know that there I discovered 2 K-Pros in a recent E-Waste Wednesday. If you're not subscribed to my second channel, you're missing a lot of Retro Hack Shack content. Anyway, I might be able to use those K-Pro machines to create disks that this particular machine will work, and then I could test out some CP/M games, maybe try out WordStar on this thing, which I think it would be perfect for. If you have any tips on how to make those disks or make things compatible so that they'll work with this particular computer, please leave those in the comments below. I'd love to read those and maybe do a follow-up video where I can show off perhaps putting this into a enclosure and getting some games and things like that running. I would love to do that. If you like this type of content, I'm going to point you to another video right now, and that is my Apple I history video, when I followed that up with actually building an Apple I. So if you like this kind of thing, you'll probably like that video too, and I'll see you over there in that one next.
End of line.